The next day, many people began to gather. The chairman asked his mentee if anyone else was expected. His mentee replied that, according to the approved guest list, representatives from 152 countries were present. The chairman pale remained silent, and the others wondered what Jin Woo had said to him to make him look like that. Suddenly, the chairman started explaining what he had seen. A massive army of dragons bursting through the darkness. Behind them walked the most enormous among them, a beast so terrifying it seemed no hunter could resist it. This creature, with its aura of all-consuming fear, could burn everything to the ground with a single breath. The chairman wondered aloud how Jin Woo was going to fight them alone. At that moment, Jin Woo emerged from the shadows behind him, saying he had just arrived. The chairman realized he shouldn't have asked about his whereabouts. He began to warn Jin Woo that making the truth public would cause chaos. Not every country would be able to quell the human unrest. Jin Woo knew this. Today, the whole world would learn the truth about the coming war. The room was filled with presidents, ministers, guild leaders, and association heads. All attention was on Jin Woo. He began to speak, saying, "It would be great if I could tell you this gate will close without trouble. But that's not true. Difficult times lie ahead for all of us. No one will be able to escape the coming battle. These creatures will appear in front of you and destroy everything you hold dear." Some voices shouted from the audience demanding proof. They claimed there was no way even national-level hunters couldn't handle these monsters. Jin Woo told them these creatures were far beyond anything humanity had faced before. Hundreds of monsters were coming, each stronger than the beast monarch who had nearly wiped out humanity. The gathered leaders demanded proof. Jin Woo raised his hand, and many gates appeared behind him. The audience gasped as Jin Woo explained that the enemy could open gates whenever and wherever they wanted. His army gave them a head start, but they still had to prepare for the worst. One man in the audience shouted, asking if Jin Woo was one of them, one of the monsters. Others demanded to know how to protect themselves. Jin Woo replied, "The most important thing is to get as far away from the enemy as possible. Run, if you can." As humanity learned of the impending war, fear spread like wildfire. People evacuated cities near the gates. Meanwhile, in a lonely place, Jin Woo stood before his massive castle. He called Baru to him, who immediately bowed. Jin Woo called the castle a little cozy dwelling, and Baru stammered in disbelief, insisting it was a place worthy of their king. Jin Woo noticed the flag atop the castle and demanded to know whose idea it was. Baran stepped forward, explaining it was his. Jin Woo asked Baran what would happen to the Shadow Army if he, their ruler, were to fall. Baran admitted their existence was tied to Jin Woo's life. If Jin Woo fell, they would all vanish. Jin Woo realized the strength and the weakness of his army, their loyalty. Baran estimated the enemy's strength to be 100 times their own. It turns out that he meant to say the enemies will have about 10 million warriors. The next day, the top-level hunter, Jay Mills, was on TV, angrily telling the broadcaster to shove that nonsense up its ass. He said if he had Hunter Jin Woo's contact, he would have told him that personally. The reporter conducting the interview countered, saying, "Still, Jin Woo is one of the best hunters in the world. If he thinks his warning shouldn't be ignored, he may be right." But the hunter retorted, "No matter how great a man he might be, it doesn't mean all his words are true. And whatever heresy he may be saying, you can't just appropriate all the gates so easily." The chairman, showing Jin Woo the footage, explained that people were gathering around the Canadian hunter. Countries with strong hunter systems, like India, were also forming their own personal raids. The chairman asked Jin Woo what he planned to do. Jin Woo replied that he would go to China first. He could not hold back 8 armies at once, so he must first secure Korea, where his family was, and leave the other tasks for later. After all, the longer the war lasted, the better his chances would be. The very next day, Jin Woo got off the airplane. He muttered about hearing bureaucrats were supposed to meet him, but was surprised to see hunter Liu Zhigang. Liu Zhigang remarked that the idiots had already started making plans, but he decided to personally bring Jin Woo up to speed. He pointed to the gate visible from the airport itself, the massive gate that had recently opened. Liu Zhigang explained that over 100,000 elite Chinese hunters were gathered there. Not just in numbers, but with outstanding skills they were ready to use to their fullest. At that moment, Jin Woo summoned his shadow army. They appeared everywhere, on rooftops and all around. Liu Zhigang realized the sheer difference in scale. Such powerful beings descending from the heavens to Jin Woo's command seemed unbelievable. He couldn't imagine these were all Jin Woo's summoned soldiers. Suddenly, Shadow Commander Baru appeared, declaring that the seat to the left of the sender was his and demanding to know how Liu Zhigang dared to stand beside the Lord. Jin Woo elbowed Baru in the stomach and ordered him to shut up. Liu Zhigang, stunned, realized Jin Woo could talk to his shadow soldiers. The gate began to open, and Jin Woo knew the war had begun. Baran, standing to his right, remarked that something was strange. There was no energy emanating from the gate. Reports from other locations indicated the same. The gates were empty. Jin Woo realized he was wrong. The monarchs had deliberately concentrated their forces at the farthest location, where a group of hunters now stood before a gate. Those hunters, standing in front of the gate from which the creatures would emerge, began recalling news headlines about Jin Woo. They knew planes with hunters were scheduled to leave for China and Japan in support of Jin Woo. But it turned out the white fortress found in the forests of Japan had nothing to do with the gate. With 5 hours until the opening, everyone hoped Jin Woo's warnings were wrong. The hunters standing at the gate didn't flinch. They were ready to protect their homeland. Suddenly, the gate began to shift. From afar, they saw what seemed like an ordinary man descending from the gate. This wasn't what they expected. The man approached the head hunter, asking if he was the one who called himself the king of this place. Some didn't understand the language, but others realized it wasn't monstrous but human-like. A nearby hunter explained that monsters could wear armor, organize systems, and perhaps even communicate. This monster wasn't mindless, but intelligent. The Canadian hunter leader realized the monster was attempting to communicate, just like Jin Woo had with the creatures of the first gate. But answering yes to this being might mean immediate subjugation. Meanwhile, Jin Woo, far from the scene, asked if there was a way to monitor the gate in Canada. Adam White, on the ground near the gate, answered Jin Woo's call. Jin Woo demanded to know why Adam was there, instead of a safer location. Adam explained that agents and hunters were assisting at the gate. They couldn't just observe passively. Suddenly, Adam noticed something strange. Before he could react, flames erupted. Dragons descended from the sky, and hundreds of monsters emerged. The hunters standing at the gate were instantly incinerated. Jin Woo yelled at Adam through the phone to run as fast as he could. But Adam, overwhelmed, described how dragons filled the sky and monsters covered the land. Jin Woo summoned his shadow soldiers to rescue Adam. A massive orc shadow appeared and promised to send Adam to safety. However, a monarch intercepted them. The monarch spewed fierce flames, and Jin Woo realized too late what had happened. He blamed himself for underestimating the enemy's strategy. The enemy had tricked Jin Woo by opening multiple gates, creating the illusion of scattered forces while focusing on a single location. Jin Woo's plan had failed. He began to wonder if there was any way to turn the tide. The monarch in Canada gloated, declaring he would savor the cries of the dying before wiping them from existence. As he moved to another location, his dragons followed, destroying everything in their path. In the United States, the president of the Hunter Association watched a live broadcast of the destruction. He muttered to himself that it was over. Everyone, hunters, agents, civilians, was dead. Even the monstrous dragons seemed unstoppable. He understood now why Jin Woo had warned them to flee. But suddenly a shadow appeared in the president's office. Jin Woo emerged, saying he had come for the runestone left behind by the beast monarch. The president, initially resistant, realized the situation was too dire to argue. He led Jin Woo to the storage room where the stone was kept. On the way, Jin Woo explained that runestones were repositories of monster power. Monarchs had created them to help humans hunt monsters and to root magic into the land through human sacrifices. The president wondered if the stone could truly make a difference. Jin Woo promised to try. After retrieving the stone, Jin Woo had one more request. Shortly after, he visited Ms. Selner, who was sitting in her home, and began to say that she didn't think anyone would be looking for her at a time like this. As soon as she saw Jin Woo, she realized that he was not the man she knew him to be. The darkness used to hide deep inside him, but now he was the darkness itself. Jin Woo began to say that he was still the person she knew, just a Tatma. What she had seen in the past had become one with him. Jin Woo began to ask what she was saying, that she could see the future, and if she could look into his future so he could find out what would be there. Mrs. Selner thought about it for a moment and agreed. After all, taking our hero by the hand, after a moment, she had tears on her face and asked Jin Woo if he was really going to do everything alone. After all, she didn't understand how it was even possible that one person could shoulder such a burden. He had decided to sacrifice one to save everyone, And Mrs. Sellner realized that thankfully it looked like he would be able to go that far after all. But Mrs. Sellner started to say that no one would even be able to remember it all, and he would have to fight a lonely battle. After all that was said, Jin Woo got up and started saying that he apologized for coming so suddenly. He then asked for her service and informed her that he had to leave. As soon as the shadow appeared, Jin Woo would travel to another time, to the tallest tower. When he found himself there, he took his phone out of his pocket and called Cha. He told her that he was a bit busy, but she was also up to her neck in business and didn't have a chance to even see him. However, she still wanted to see Jin Woo at least once and asked him to promise that he would come and see her. He agreed and assured her that he would definitely come. As soon as he hung up the phone, the head of the guild approached the huntress and told her that it was time for them to move out, as the very thing that would lead them to the endless war in this world was about to begin. The Eurasian Hunters Federation, the Hunters Association of Europe, the African Hunters Emergency Association, and the United States Hunters Emergency Association, all together, hundreds of thousands of hunters were heading to the battlefield. That monarch who was standing near the slain hunters began to say that he was here and looked up into the sky. At the same time, on the other side of the planet, our hero was standing on a high tower and heard his voice saying that already millions of his companions were dead. How much longer would he be in hiding? To which Jin Woo told him to wait a little longer and they would see each other soon. The next day, the monarch stood on the ruined building and realized that something was too quiet near him. He wondered what the Smoke Lord of Shadows was up to, although he wasn't surprised that he had escaped into the abyss. After all, his army had over 10 million soldiers, while he only had 100,000. Going against them with such a number was tantamount to suicide. But suddenly a missile flew into the monarch's face and began to collapse, followed by many more missiles that began to explode near him. The fighters that were hovering in the air began to say that the goal had been achieved, but from above they couldn't see if they had killed Leonidas Raminer, and they hoped that this time they had succeeded. But suddenly, after the fire began to reach the sky, one of the pilots saw a large eye that was near him, and he did not realize what it was, for they all saw a huge smoke in which two big and scary eyes were visible. He was very bored, and at that very second, he started destroying all the fighters that were hovering in the air. While Monarch was playing with the birds that were flying in the air, Jin Woo was in his castle on a deserted island and was sitting on his throne. He was too pensive, for he did not know what was going to happen next. But as soon as he started to lift his head up, he saw that above his throne was written, "My King," and he smiled because of it, for his commander Beru had done it. As his shadow soldiers began to appear, Jin Woo knew what he had to do next. Baran, who appeared on the side of the Lord's right hand, then began to say that it was too dangerous. Igris, who appeared on his left side, agreed with him. But Jin Woo realized that they were all worried about him. However, he can't sit idly by, and even if the danger is too great, not this time. And the previous Shadow Lord said that this was the reason why he chose him. So he began to turn to Baran, asking what he would do if Osborne was in the exact same situation. Baran began to say that there was no way he would have given up, and our hero smiled after those words. There was a look of surprise behind it. He looked at his lord and began to realize that he was the same as the previous Shadow Lord. Immediately after that, a decision was made, and all of his shadow commanders bowed their heads and began to say that they would follow him until the very end. As soon as Jin Woo heard that, he stood up, and Yu, along with him. And as soon as he pulled out his phone, Baran asked if he would call his family at a time like this, to which our hero replied that he was afraid to hear their voices and it would prevent him from moving on. At that very second, he cracked his phone open and was ready to go to the very spot where his opponent was waiting for him. There was only one of the dragons left here now, flying behind one of the fighters out of that entire dozen. Still, the dragon was much faster, and eventually it caught up to that fighter and blew it up. But the soldier who was flying it was able to eject in time. As soon as his parachute opened, he started to descend to the ground and found himself near one of the broken buildings. He didn't stand still, and at that very second, he hid behind a corner, seeing his comrades being devoured by the terrifying monsters nearby. Suddenly, goosebumps ran through his body, and he saw some slime drop on his shoulder. When he turned around, he saw a huge centipede in front of him that was staring right at his face, and at that very second, it started to attack him. However, he jumped aside in time and grabbed his automatic rifle and started shooting at the centipede. He hoped that he would be able to destroy it, but the gun ran out of ammunition, and he realized that this was his end, and he was going to die. He barred his eyes, but as soon as he opened them, he saw that the monster that was attacking him had been torn apart. At first, he didn't realize what had happened, for it was all done in a second. And as soon as he looked behind that slain monster, he saw the hunter, Jin Woo, who was standing as if he was Jesus. Immediately, Jin Woo turned around and told that soldier to hurry up and leave. But the soldier didn't understand, for he was still in a state of concussion. But as soon as he saw the terrifying monsters coming towards him, he started screaming. At that very second, Jin Woo began to use the ruler's touch, and a power that was created from darkness appeared in his right blade. And as soon as he swung, all the monsters that were running at him were destroyed. The hunter realized that this would be the start of the war, and all of his shadow soldiers started to appear. At that second, at the same moment, the monarch realized that the Shadow Lord had appeared on the eastern front, and the monster that was near him began to speak to the monarch. "Why don't I move all their forces there too?" To which another monarch started to say that his shadow had no army, so now it was best for them to disperse their forces. He was going to single-handedly defeat all the monsters and turn them into his puppets. Afterward, it looked like this person had decided to start small instead of going for a meadow attack, and the monarch was wondering what the Shadow Lord was up to, after all. At the moment, the head of the association was watching a live report from the place where they reported that communication with the hunters, who had been sent to fight the monsters, had been lost. America had urgently mobilized the armed forces to buy time to evacuate many of the population. He realized that the tragedy that unfolded on the other side of the world, first in Canada and now in America, which was famous for its incredible fighting power, was being destroyed literally before his eyes. And now humanity was left with only one hope, and he prayed that it would not leave them. Hundreds of soldiers were joining the ranks of the Dark Army every second, like a tsunami that swallowed everything around it. And the Shadow Wars were rapidly filling the battlefield, painting it in deep black colors. Those giants, taller than skyscrapers and capable of laying down several neighborhoods with a single blow, stood ominously in front of him. With lightning speed, he headed towards them and slashed their legs. Soon after, the shadow soldiers finished off these monsters, attacking them like locusts. Thus, he was turning the slain monsters into his army. However, when he raised his head, he saw a great many dragons flying at him. At this moment, he should not have despaired, for if he did not want to act, he would have to be forced to do so right now. Jin Woo decided to summon his entire 100,000 army. As soon as those dragons that were in the air saw this, they started spewing horrible flames toward the shadow soldiers. The dragon that was floating in the air began to say that he wanted to destroy the Dragon King. However, by doing so, he would only make them laugh. Jin Woo was not standing still. At this time, he was already on the Dark Dragon and started telling him that he was talking a lot. As soon as he jumped off his dragon, he hit that talking dragon with full force, dealing damage to it and causing it to start falling to the ground.